thanks so much for joining us on Political Playlist Conversations. We started Political Playlist to highlight young politicians like yourself. And we noticed that a lot of our followers don't get to know who you are on a personal level. And this is exactly why we started the platform. So thanks again for joining us.
Of course, I'm really happy to be here. And thank you for all of the work you're doing to get young people more involved in politics. It's so important right now.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to let our viewers and listeners know a little bit about you. So you are the youngest representative from California in this Congress. You represent the San Diego district. You have an amazing resume. You previously worked at UNICEF, the UN, the State Department under the Obama administration. You've started two amazing organizations as well. It's Project Connect, an education nonprofit that focuses on connecting schools with the internet. And then as well as San Diego for Every Child, which is focusing on ending child poverty. So, you have a very impressive resume at your age right now. And I think, speaking to millennials here, you're at our age, everyone's going through a very interesting time in their life. They're applying for jobs. They're wondering if they're on the right career path. They might be being rejected by jobs right now during COVID. And, what I'd love to hear from you that a lot of listeners might not know is that you ran for Congress before, right? And, you persevered through that moment of not winning and what you learned from that experience. And, you obviously came back and you won this election. So can you give us a little background into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really good point because we as millennials, I think often are quite hard on ourselves in terms of our career progression and what we should be doing. And some advice I follow myself and like to give people is that you should focus on the problem you're trying to solve and all the different ways that you can have an impact solving that problem and focus less on exactly what your title is or if you're on the right path, because what you really want to be is someone who wants to do something, not someone who wants to be something. And so focusing on that problem, I found, is very helpful in grounding and making sure you're doing the right thing and you're on the right path. The first time I ran for office, I lost, and it was very difficult for me. It was the first time I'd ever run for office. I felt like I'd really put myself out there. It's very vulnerable to run for office. And so it was really difficult after I lost. You're still out in the community and seeing people, and everyone wants to know how you're doing and they want you to comfort them. And, I actually didn't know that I would necessarily run for office again. That's when I founded San Diego for Every Child, because as I was running for office, I realized that so many of the issues I'd been working on overseas were actually a real issue at home, that we had a huge issue with childhood poverty in San Diego. And I wanted to use the network and the connections and the platform I'd gotten running for office to work on that problem. And so I started that initiative, worked on it a lot. And then when Susan Davis announced her retirement, I decided it was the right choice to run for office again. But it was definitely difficult to try and make that decision again after remembering all of the pain of losing an election.
Sure, because it's very vulnerable experience, right? And I think the fact that it's also a timing as well. The fact that Susan Davis was retiring, and it honestly really worked out in your favor, where, I think all of us would want to win the first time, but you probably end up learning a lot from that experience and to bring it on to have a successful campaign the next time.
I think that's right. And as people reminded me people as illustrious as Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, they all lost the first time they ran for office. And so you do learn a lot. I was definitely a better candidate the second time, had a better sense of what I needed to do. And also, I think that people could relate to me in a different way because they'd seen me go through that really vulnerable loss. And they felt like I could relate to some of the challenges that they were facing in their life.
Absolutely. And, that kind of brings me to my next question is, what truly inspired you to run for office? Was it an event, a mentor, or a life experience? We've kind of found that these stories are really the ones that show your vulnerability and who you are as a person.
Yeah. So I was never one of those people who thought I was going to run for office. It was never part of the plan. When we were all younger and we watched The West Wing and everyone had a favorite character, mine was the National Security Advisor. I wasn't one of the political people. I wanted to be the National Security Advisor. It is a great show. For me, I always thought I would stay in that policy advisor role. I worked on the 2016 presidential campaign. We lost, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do after that. I decided to, for a year, start and run Project Connect, which was an organization that maps and connects schools around the world to the internet, is now part of UNICEF. And as I was doing that work overseas, a few incidences happened that made me realize that while the work I was doing was really important, everything I cared about was at risk here at home. And that if I really was going to stay true to my own values of working on the problems that need the most help, then I had to come back home and work on this. And those incidences were one, I actually landed from a work trip at JFK the day that the Muslim ban was announced. And I'm not a lawyer. So I felt kind of helpless. Like I couldn't help do the injunctions in the terminal that many of the volunteer lawyers were doing. I brought them some food, but I realized I did know how to do policy, and that policy was one of the things we were going to need to fix. And then the other thing is that my youngest sibling is a trans male. And so a lot of the rhetoric and the policies coming out of the White House at the time were affecting my family very personally. And I just realized that all the people I'd looked up to my whole life, they didn't have the answers either. And that at some point, if I wanted there to be new leaders, if I wanted things to be different, I had to stop writing talking points for someone else and start saying it myself.
Yeah, that's a defining moment when you come from a strong family background as well, and you're close with your family and extended family, but then to kind of take it upon yourself and say, okay, it's now my time to be front and center doing this. That's a big step.
Yeah, and it was definitely a long conversation with my family about what running meant. I think, like a lot of women, it took people asking me a number of times to run for office before I really said yes. Yeah. But ultimately, I'm glad I did, because I think I'm in a position where I can make a lot of impact and have a lot of good in what is an increasingly difficult time for our country.
Absolutely. You were talking about your policy experience, and I wanted to touch on, you've had a lot of international experience as well. I believe you worked abroad, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And was that in Ghana?
I studied abroad in Ghana when I was in school. Yeah, I studied actually their transition from a military dictatorship to a democracy. Wow. But I worked in Fiji and then a few other places.
And you have just been put on the Foreign Relations Committee as well. So how do you plan on using that experience, your past experience working abroad, also being in an African country that went through such a major change? How do you plan on bringing that to your position on the Foreign Relations Committee?
So I think that on the Foreign Affairs Committee, in the Senate, it's Foreign Relations. In the House, It's Foreign Affairs. I don't know why. But on the Foreign Affairs Committee, One of the things I'm really hoping to do is bring my experience working in our foreign policy, working on these kinds of issues like conflict prevention, post-coup transitions, but also my experience as a millennial who's never known a day in our adult lives that the United States hasn't been at war. And so making sure that as we're rebuilding America's standing around the world after 4 years where it's really been eroded, that we are doing it in a way that's not just trying to recreate the systems of the past, but really thinking about what kinds of international organizations, what kinds of alliances and structures do we need to be able to address the kinds of challenges we're facing right now, whether it's COVID-19 or climate change or so much else. And I think I'm also using my experience internationally, unfortunately, is increasingly relevant here at home. So making sure that we're thinking about what we know from other political violence incidences of what we need to do to make sure that we're addressing the problems here. So a big part of that is accountability and holding people accountable for violence, whether they committed it or they incited or encouraged it. Repairing the breaks in our society that allow people to mobilize violence around them, making sure we're thinking about how strong and functioning our institutions are, what our social media ecosystem looks like. We know the kinds of things we need to do because we've done it in other countries, and now it's a question of making sure we're doing it here at home.
Yeah, it's practicing what we're preaching, right, abroad. And I think you've probably seen so much of that in your experiences abroad, especially, probably being in Ghana and what's, going on today in our current climate. Before we sort of, we will definitely be addressing the Capitol, siege that happened, but I'd love to know a little bit more about committee life, because that's one thing a lot of people don't understand and the positions that you have in our Congress. So can you maybe fill us in on, we kind of joke at Political Playlist, it's like you're going to school, you have your periods and Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but, how often are those meetings happening? And, how many people are on the committees that you're on as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really does feel like college, actually. We're called freshmen. We do a lottery to pick our office. You pick which clubs you're going to join, and who's on your floor is who becomes your best friend. So it really does feel like that. So most people are on 2 committees. You can also be on a 3rd committee, and there are some committees that are very important. And so most people are only on that one committee. So I'm on Foreign Affairs and Armed Services. Truthfully, COVID has made things a little bit different. So I don't have a good answer for you on what it would normally be like. I haven't experienced that yet. But, generally there's about, depending on the balance of power in the Congress, there's about 30 or so Democrats, and then a similar but smaller number of Republicans. The people who have the majority in Congress have the chairmanship. The people who are in the minority are the ranking member. Every committee has subcommittees that have jurisdiction. And really, School of Rock lied to us because the way a bill becomes a law is really through the committee in most cases. So almost everything starts in a committee. You have committee hearings on it. You do committee markups of the bill. The committee votes on it, and then it goes to the full House floor, and that's when it gets passed. And generally, the House floor will follow the recommendation of the Committee of Jurisdiction. So there's those are the formal committees. And then for some cross-cutting issues, there are caucuses and other groups that people can join where you can work on those issues, but it doesn't have the same formal authority as those committees.
Yeah, and a lot of people miss, that experience and that news of hearing all the work that goes into a lot of these bills from the subcommittees and committees. So, I remember I worked there as a congressional page, and we got to sit in some of those hearings and listen to them. And it was great to see it kind of felt a little bit more behind the scenes, right? And then that's when you get to see a lot of people like yourself and other senators, walking around the halls of Congress. you touched a little bit about sort of your, being called a freshman, candidate, and your first week is your, with you go through your training, sort of speak, right? Can you touch on some of that? Because you said you guys vote on certain things and what committees you want to be on. We don't really get to see that part of your life as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that from you.
Yes. So much like college, we had new member orientation. I jokingly call it Congress school. It started the week after the election. They brought everyone who won both parties to Washington, D.C. And there were a lot of really important, heavy things we were thinking about, learning how to vote for the first time, walking on the House floor. And then there's just the really mundane. It really is just a new job and you're starting up a new office and you have to figure out how to set up the phones and what internet connectivity is going to be like and filing all your paperwork so you can get paid and get your healthcare benefits and all of that. So it's a mix of those things. During new member orientation, you vote on your class leadership. So I'm the freshman representative to the Steering and Policy Committee, which is the House Democrats committee where they do committee assignments and also
congratulations, huge honor.
Yeah, thank you. Overarching policy priorities for the caucus. And then we have leadership races. So I'm sure many of you heard about the speaker's race. This time, Speaker Pelosi ran unopposed, but we also vote on the chair of our caucus, on committee chairs. And so we're voting on all of that. They've gotten very creative in COVID. We now have an app that we use to do some of that voting, which is a new technology, but I think it's very useful. And then
it's exciting to hear, though, that, Congress is adopting new technology, especially us being millennials. A lot of people think the system's very archaic, but there's a lot of...
It's still archaic, slowly but surely, but there is an app for you to do caucus votes on now.
Okay, that's positive to hear. We're making baby steps then.
Exactly.
So can you explain that lottery system? Because that was one thing I remember seeing a lot of new members actually talking about, and they couldn't believe some of the voting was actually done this way, I think. So
so we have to pick our offices, and because we're all in the same class, there's no way to determine seniority in the class. And so to pick our offices, they literally pull our names out of a hat to pick the order of who gets to choose offices. So I was number 10 of my class of about 50. So I had a really good lottery number. I'm very happy with the office we ended up with. When COVID is over, come visit me in Longworth 1232.
Absolutely.
But then...
Go ahead.
No, and then we also do a lottery for seniority within class on committees. So basically, once freshmen get put on a committee, then they pick our names out of a hat to determine our order of seniority on that committee, since we're all in the same class. Like
the Harry Potter hat. No, but do you know what offices are the best? When you get picked, is that... So they give you number 10. Are you now like, yes, I want this one then?
Well, you'll be potentially unsurprised to know that I'm a little type A. So we ranked every open office to determine which ones we wanted so that when it came to our turn, we knew exactly what we were going to pick. And then, of course, still we second guessed it, and you have like 5 minutes to do it. So we waited till the end of the 5 minutes to really pick because we weren't sure. But they give you a list of what offices are open. In normal times, you'd be able to just go tour them all. Because of COVID, that was a little bit more difficult. But we had them ranked for ourselves. And, there are the best offices. Truthfully, freshmen are not getting any of those. And then everyone has different priorities, like if it's close to the bathroom or close to the elevator, or if you have a good view or if you have more floor space, so it's just like anything. I wouldn't say there's one that everyone was like, oh, that's the one you want.
That's so funny because, once again, we've all been through different phases of our life. And I always joked, when you're in high school, you're the freshman. So you're low on the totem pole, then you're a senior, then you get to college, freshman again, out of college, then you become a freshman at your job. So it's a constant life cycle and just trying to figure that out and roll with the punches. So, I can imagine, for you wanting to become a congresswoman and, it's been a dream of yours. And you probably never imagined your first week in Congress would really be the way it happened. And, I think everyone can agree that it was truly a, horrifying experience. And the stories that are starting to come out now in the news and media from a lot of people like yourself and even staff members, are inspiring and as well as very scary to hear. And I think one thing that I heard that you were mentioning that I didn't hear from a lot of Congress people were you were asked to take your pin off. So in case, anyone was captured, they couldn't identify you. Can you give us some more behind the scenes of that and how, once again, your first week in Congress, I bet that was the last thing you would expect to be doing.
Yeah. So I was in the House chamber when the attack happened. I was in the gallery, which is the balcony overlooking the House floor. House members don't normally sit there, but because of COVID, we were distanced. So they had some of us up there, which is part of why the evacuation was so difficult, because it's not the normal circumstances that they would have all of us in the House chamber. So for a while, it was all normal. In fact, I remember we were getting alerts that some of the office buildings were evacuating, and my parents were getting nervous. And I was like, don't worry, I'm in the House chamber. It's the safest place I could possibly be. So that was not accurate. And, we were sitting there, we were doing the debate on the Arizona election event that they told us to take our evacuation hoods out from under the seats and be prepared to use them because they had just shot tear gas in the rotunda and they weren't sure if it was going to get in. The masks are really hard to open. So a lot of us were struggling with that. They took the speaker away to a secure location. We heard Capitol Police running, a lot of commotion. Eventually, they told us to put the hoods on to get down on the floor because they weren't sure what was going to happen. We heard shots. We heard the rioters knocking on the glass doors right behind us. Eventually, we were evacuating. There's no way straight around the gallery, so we had to climb under railings and chairs. And at one point while we were evacuating, they told us to get down again. And that's when they said, you might want to take off your pin because we don't want them to know you're a member of Congress because then they'll target you. And that was kind of when it really set in for me that they were coming for us. This was not just random violence, that they were trying to overturn an election. They were trying to threaten and intimidate and potentially even capture and kill elected members of our government because they didn't like what was happening. And that's, I think, when I got pretty scared.
Yeah, I can't even imagine it. So you mentioned your parents were there as well. I'm sure to, celebrate coming in.
My parents were home watching on TV. Okay.
Yeah. I was like, oh man. Probably the last thing a parent wants to see as well. But it's, despite it being such a horrible experience, I'm sure some of the other people you were with, it's also an experience you'll never forget. And to be with your staff members, it probably brought you a lot closer, which you wouldn't expect in your first week of Congress. So,
yeah. And I was really fortunate. I was with some members of Congress who were former police chiefs and former Army Rangers, and they were amazing. They really stepped up, made sure we all knew what we needed to do. And in fact, all of us who were up in the gallery that day, we now have a text chain. We've done Zoom sessions. We're really helping each other through this difficult time. So the camaraderie, and it really does feel like a family, that has been a really nice, unfortunate side effect of this.
Yeah, there's a very positive thing that comes out of this, I think, and that's becoming closer to some of the members, right away as they come like family. So, Um, the inauguration is tomorrow. So I think everyone needs a little bit of a celebration after the year of going through COVID. What are some of the plans for tomorrow? Will you be attending?
So I will be attending the inauguration in person. I think it's important that we do that we show that no angry mob or angry riot can get in the way of the norms and processes and traditions of our democracy. Most of the inauguration celebration is going to be virtual. So there'll be the ceremony at the Capitol where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are sworn in. Members of Congress will be in attendance, and then everything else will be virtual events. We're really encouraging everyone to stay home, stay safe, watch on TV, watch on your computer. That is going to be most of the celebrations. And I think we've all gotten, unfortunately, pretty good at celebrating together virtually. So I know that it's still going to feel like a happy moment, even though we can't all be together.
For sure. I've joked the amount of times I've been on a Zoom or, any type of these conferences, and still my volume doesn't work right away. I'm like, we've been in this long enough. It should work, automatically now.
Totally.
So I just wanted to touch a little bit on COVID, because I know a big proposition you're going to be focusing on is small businesses. And I'm from San Diego. I live in Los Angeles, but every time I've been coming home to San Diego, I'm seeing another restaurant shut down or another shop. So, how are we really going to start building some of this back? And granted, it is going to be baby steps but I think there's a lot more people hurting than it seems right now. And to see things like that happen is tough. So I'd love to hear from you what your plan is, since it's such a big part of your campaign.
Yeah, just talking to folks across the district, I think it's clear that there is a lot of suffering, and it is pervasive. There's some studies that say something like 60% of small businesses in the San Diego region are going to close for good. So I'm glad that Congress was able to get the first a down payment, let's call it, on COVID relief right before the new year. But I think it's clear that we need to do a lot more. And I'm heartened that the Biden administration, the incoming Biden administration, feels the same. They've already laid out their plan on what they want to do on COVID relief. We are working now to make sure we're able to effectively implement what they've laid out, including more funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, making sure that there's specific pots of money for community development, financial institutions, and other minority serving institutions, so that that money actually gets to the smallest of small businesses who we know need it the most. I think we also, personally, I think we need to make sure we're getting funding not only to existing businesses, but if there are new ones that are starting out of this, that they are able to get the funding that they need. Because I think this can be a transformative time for our economy if we can make sure we're promoting that innovation as we're stabilizing things as well. I think it's going to get harder before it gets better. We know the Southern California COVID numbers are increasing by the day. I'm hopeful the Biden administration will be able to make sure the vaccine gets out faster and gets out to those who need it, which will help. But it's really a race against the virus, and especially these new strains that are potentially more harmful. So for now, I think it is important that in San Diego, we're staying home, we're doing what we need to do, we're getting the vaccine out as fast as possible, and then we in Congress will make sure we're getting assistance to our families and our small businesses.
Yes, I feel like it is very hopeful. We're hearing about the vaccine getting out a little faster, and I do believe what you said, it could be a really transformative time, especially for some people who are starting new businesses. I'm hearing that a lot. And I think, whatever help that can be given from Congress to help jumpstart that could really turn all of this around. So I just have a couple last minute questions, but you being, young, what advice do you have out there for, young people right now who, they feel a little disenfranchised right now by the political scene, and, what sort of hope can you give some young people out there today?
Yeah, well, the bottom line is the only way it's going to get better is if you get involved. And the only way you're going to have better people in office is if you decide to run or help someone who's running. That's really the bottom line. When I was first running, I was like, I don't know if I want to go to Congress. I don't want to be there. It seems so like, I don't know, swampy, I guess is the word people use. But then I was like, well, we'll only stop being that way if more people decide that they're not going to opt out. They're going to go and try and make it better. And I think especially as young people, we always think that someone else has the answer, that someone else knows more, that there's just someone out there who's working on this problem and will solve it. And what I've learned is that that's not necessarily the case. You should do your homework, make sure you learn from other people, and don't think you know everything. But our generation in particular has a lot of unique experiences, has a lot of unique insight. And so I'd say if you think that you have something you can add to the conversation, if you think that there's something missing that you can do, then you should run for office. You should get involved because we need your voice now more than ever.
Yeah, no, it's so great to hear. And especially from someone like you who also went through this experience and ran and picked yourself back up to run again. But, what you said, sometimes we feel like we know everything. And I'm sure we've all heard that from our parents before. We don't know everything. And it's a constant learning experience. So that gives, I think, a lot of people hope. And you're an example that it can happen. Before we end, we wanted to try something new on our conversation. So I'm going to say one or two words, and then we'd love to just get a one-word response. And it's just sort of like a quick back and forth. Okay. But we thought it would be fun to try this out. So the first word is California.
Sunshine.
United Nations.
Cooperation.
China.
Competition.
Inauguration.
Celebration.
Taylor Swift.
Oh, great music. I know that's two words.
Yeah. It is great music. Well, anyways, Sara, thank you so much for joining us. I really loved speaking with you. I hope we'll be able to speak with you again. And, I just want to congratulate you on your first couple weeks, and we can't wait to see what you do.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation. All of you listening, run for office, get involved. We need you, and would love to talk with you all again anytime.
Great. Thanks so much, Sara.
Thanks.
Good luck at the inauguration. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.